The email arrived at 7:43 on a Friday evening, unsigned and brief. Catherine Sterling read it 3 times before her hands began to shake, a rare physical betrayal she'd trained herself against 15 years ago when she'd walked into her first board meeting as the youngest CEO in Apex Technologies history. The Monday board meeting will be your last. They have evidence. MT has been planning since the beginning of the year. A friend, MT Marcus Thornton, her CFO, her former mentor, the man who taught her everything about navigating corporate warfare when she'd been VP of product hungry and naive and convinced loyalty meant something in business. Catherine's office overlooked Chicago's Gold Coast from the 42nd floor glass walls on 3 sides that made her feel suspended above the city she'd conquered. Tonight, those walls felt like a cage. She deleted the email without forwarding it to anyone, a decision that would either prove brilliant or catastrophic. 15 years of building Apex from a garage startup to a $10 billion AI empire, and Marcus had been plotting her downfall for 11 months. The timeline made sense now. January, when she'd passed him over for COO choosing, instead to restructure the executive suite entirely. He'd smiled at the announcement, congratulated her vision, then apparently started burning everything down. Catherine's reflection in the darkened window showed a woman who looked exactly like the CEO everyone expected. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in a twist that cost $200 to maintain, weekly Navy suit that whispered power without screaming. It diamond studs her mother had saved 3 years to buy her when Catherine made her first million. The Ice Queen, they called her in tech blogs. Catherine had never corrected them. Fear was useful. Affection was not. Her phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. A text from Daniel Hayes, the photographer she'd hired 6 months ago to shoot Apex's annual report. His contact photo showed him laughing at something off camera, the kind of unguarded joy Catherine had forgotten existed. Sorry to reschedule tomorrow's shoot. Emmy has a cardiology appointment. Next week work, Emmy. Emmeline Hayes, 11 years old with her father's warm eyes and a heart condition that required monthly specialist visits. Catherine had met her exactly twice, both times accidentally, when Daniel brought her to the office during school breaks. The girl had looked at Catherine with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that reminded Catherine uncomfortably of herself at that age. The second time, Emmy had asked her father in a voice pitched just loud enough for Catherine to hear, "Is Miss Catherine going to be my new mom?" Daniel had gone. Scarlett stammered an apology. Catherine waved off with practiced professionalism. But the question had lodged itself somewhere behind her sternum, a splinter working its way towards something vital. Catherine typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Professional distance was the smart play. Professional distance was what she'd maintained flawlessly for 6 months, even as those monthly coffee meetings to discuss Daniel's business strategy stretched into 2-hour conversations that had nothing to do with photography and everything to do with the way he listened like her words actually mattered. Tomorrow evening works better anyway. Dinner, Alinea 7. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The board meeting could wait. Marcus's betrayal could wait. Everything could wait, except this feeling that had been building since July, when Daniel had set up his lighting equipment in the executive conference room and looked at her through the camera lens, like he could see past the Ice Queen to whoever Catherine Sterling actually was underneath. Her phone lit up immediately. Daniel's reply was 3 words that somehow contained an entire question. "Dinner, I'll be there." Catherine turned back to the window, watching her reflection superimpose itself over Chicago's glittering skyline. She'd built this empire by never wanting anything she couldn't strategize her way into owning. Daniel Hayes, with his struggling photography business and his sick daughter and his fundamental decency, was the first thing in 15 years she wanted without knowing how to acquire it. She whispered to her reflection, testing the words, "I've waited long enough." The city lights below offered no answer. Daniel Hayes sat at his kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of medical bills, and the sinking certainty that hard work and talent weren't going to be enough this time. The final notice from Northwestern Medicine lay on top of the pile red letters announcing his failure in 18-point font. Outstanding balance, $47.52 in fountain. Account will be sent to collections unless payment received by December 31st. Emmy was in her bedroom doing homework, completely unaware that their entire life balanced on a financial knife edge. Daniel had made sure of that. 11-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about whether their medical condition was bankrupting their father. 11-year-olds should worry about math homework and friend drama and whether they'd get the telescope they wanted for Christmas. Daniel opened his MacBook and pulled up his calendar for the coming week. Monday, wedding shoot in Oak Park, $3,500. Tuesday, family portrait session at the studio, $800. Wednesday, corporate headshots for a law firm, $1,200. Thursday, company holiday party, $2,000. Total $7,500 for a week's work, which sounded impressive until you subtracted Emmy's experimental medication at $4,000 a month, rent at $2,400, the specialist visits at $1,500, the tutor at $600, because Emmy missed so much school for appointments, and the $800 monthly payment on the mountain of accumulated medical debt. His average monthly income hovered around $15,000, which should have been comfortable. But the experimental drug Emmy's cardiologist had prescribed wasn't covered by insurance, and the months when they had to run additional tests or adjust her medication could spike to $20,000 in expenses. January and February were always slow for event photography. Daniel's savings account currently held $4,200. By March, they'd be underwater. The phone on the table buzzed. Big Tom Ricci calling like he did every Friday evening to check in. Daniel considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered. Tom had been his best friend since high school, back when Daniel thought his future involved a corner office and quarterly earnings reports instead of lighting ratios and aperture settings. Tommy's voice boomed through the speaker. Danny boy, tell me you're not sitting there with those bills again. Daniel glanced at the paperwork spread across the table. How'd you know? Because it's Friday night and you're home. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work or Emmy or worrying about money? I'm doing something tomorrow. Dinner with a client. Tommy laughed, the sound rich with skepticism. A client, right. Would this client happen to be that CEO you've been mooning over for 6 months? Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. Catherine Sterling's is not, I'm not mooning. She asked for business advice. I've been helping her understand the creative industry. It's purely professional. Sure it is. And I'm the Pope. Listen, I got a job for you next week if you want it. Charity gala downtown needs 2 photographers. 10 grand split between us. You and $10,000. Half would go to Tom, but $5,000 would cover Emmy's medication for the month with a little left over. Daniel's pride warred briefly with necessity. Tom had been throwing him work for 3 years, ever since Daniel had walked away from his marketing director position at a Fortune 500 company to pursue photography full-time. Tom had taught him everything about the business side of the craft during those brutal first 6 months when Daniel barely knew which end of the camera to point at the subject. I'm in. Thanks, Tom. Don't thank me. You're the best shooter I ever trained. That eye of yours, man, it's something special. MBA types like you think you need the degree to succeed. But skills, Danny, real skills you can actually do with your hands build with your brain. That's what keeps you employed. Remember that. Daniel smiled despite the weight pressing on his chest. Tom loved to pontificate about the value of practical expertise over academic credentials. I'll remember. And Danny, take this CEO to a nice dinner. Buy her flowers. Stop pretending you are not already halfway in love with her. The call ended before Daniel could formulate a denial. He stared at his phone at Catherine's text message still glowing on the screen. Alinea, one of the most expensive restaurants in Chicago. The kind of place where Daniel would need to borrow a suit from Tom because his own was 7 years old and showing its age. The kind of place where a CEO worth hundreds of millions belonged and a struggling photographer definitely did not. But Catherine had asked, and Daniel, despite every rational objection his brain could manufacture, desperately wanted to say yes to whatever she was offering. Emmy appeared in the doorway clutching her astronomy textbook. Dad, I don't understand gravitational lensing. Daniel pushed the bills aside and gestured her over. Show me the problem. She settled into the chair next to him, pointing to a diagram in her book. Daniel helped her work through the physics his daughter's quick mind, grasping concepts that would have baffled most kids her age. Emmy was brilliant, curious, determined. She deserved a father who could afford her medication without panic attacks over bank statements. She deserved a future where her heart condition didn't define every decision her family made. She deserved better than what Daniel could currently provide. Got it. Emmy's face lit up with understanding. Then casually, like she was commenting on the weather, are you texting Miss Catherine again? Daniel's hand froze over his phone. How did you say You get this look, like you're happy and scared at the same time. Emmy tilted her head, studying him with that unnerving perceptiveness. Does she like you back? It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups say when they're afraid of the answer. Emmy closed her textbook. Grammy Constance called today. She said she and Grandpa Philip want me to come stay with them for winter break. Daniel's stomach dropped. Constance and Philip Winters. Lisa's parents had been making increasingly pointed comments about Daniel's ability to provide a stable environment for Emmy. The private investigator's report, sitting in Daniel's desk drawer, confirmed his worst fears. Lisa's parents were considering a custody suit. What did you tell her? That I'd ask you. Emmy's voice went small. I don't want to go, Dad. They're nice, but they look at me like I'm broken. You don't look at me like that. Daniel pulled her into a hug, feeling her slight frame against his chest. 3 years since Lisa's death, and Emmy still carried that grief like a stone. Adding Catherine to their lives, even just as friends, felt like tempting fate. What if it didn't work? What if Catherine realized that dating a single father with a sick child was more trouble than it was worth? What if Emmy got attached and then lost another person she loved? But what if it could work? What if Catherine, who listened to him talk about f-stops and ISO settings like they mattered, who remembered Emmy's birthday and asked about her latest astronomy obsession, who looked at Daniel like he was more than just a struggling photographer drowning in medical bills, what if she could actually be part of their lives? Daniel released Emmy, smoothed her dark hair back from her face. You're not going to Grammys for winter break unless you want to. This is your home. I'm your dad. That's not changing. Emmy studied his face for a long moment. Are you going to dinner with Miss Catherine tomorrow? Yes. Good. Emmy picked up her textbook and headed back to her room, pausing in the doorway. She looks at you the way you look at her, like happy and scared at the same time. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with his bills and his phone and the text message that felt like it might change everything. He typed his response, dinner, I'll be there. Catherine arrived at Alinea 20 minutes early, which gave her time to second-guess everything about the evening. She'd chosen a black dress that walked the line between professional and personal, paired with the diamond earrings that had been her first major purchase after Apex's Series A funding. The maitre d' recognized her immediately, led her to the table she'd reserved in the quietest corner of the restaurant. She ordered champagne and tried not to calculate the number of ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Apex's board meeting loomed on Monday. Marcus's betrayal waited like a landmine. Her company, her life's work, her entire identity balanced on the edge of collapse. And here she sat about to risk her heart on a man who didn't even know this was a date. Daniel appeared in the restaurant entrance at 6:58, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. The suit he wore fit well enough that Catherine suspected he'd borrowed it, but he wore it like he belonged, that natural charisma making heads turn as he crossed to her table. When he smiled, Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a lock she hadn't known existed clicking open. You look incredible. Catherine managed a smile that felt more genuine than anything she'd produced in a board meeting. You clean up rather nicely yourself for a man who spends his days crawling around, getting the perfect shot of fidgety children. Daniel laughed as he sat down. Those fidgety children pay the bills. But something shadowed his expression, gone before Catherine could analyze it. She'd built a career reading people, finding the weaknesses and pressure points that let her negotiate better deals and outmaneuver competitors. With Daniel, she found herself wanting to know him, not leverage him. The distinction felt revolutionary. Something's wrong. Not a question. Daniel's fingers tightened around his water glass, and Catherine watched him decide whether to lie. She respected him more when he chose honesty. Emmy's school, the tuition went up this year. I'm behind. They've given me until the end of the month. Catherine's hand moved toward his before she could stop it, hovering in the space between them, like a bridge neither had permission to cross. No. He spoke gently, but the word was absolute. That's not why I'm telling you. I'll figure it out. I always do. The waiter arrived with champagne Catherine had pre-ordered, interrupting the tension crackling between them. As the bubbles rose in their glasses, Catherine felt her carefully rehearsed speech dissolving. She'd planned this conversation for weeks, mapped out every word like a business presentation. But Daniel looked at her with those warm eyes, and suddenly she didn't want strategy. She wanted truth. I didn't just invite you here to discuss business strategies. Her voice came out softer than she'd intended, missing the armor she usually wore in conversation. Though I admit that would be safer territory. Daniel leaned forward and Catherine caught the scent of his cologne, something understated and warm. Safe isn't always better. Sometimes the risks are worth taking. Are they? Catherine's fingers traced the stem of her champagne glass, watching the way light refracted through the crystal. I've built my life around calculated risks, Daniel. Emotional investments weren't part of my business plan. And yet here we are. His eyes held hers, steady and patient, and utterly unreadable. Catherine took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. Emmy asked me something last week when I stopped by the studio. She asked if I was going to be her new mom. Daniel nearly choked on his champagne, his face flushing red. She what, Catherine? I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Don't be. Catherine held up a hand, stopping his apology. It made me realize something I've been avoiding. Children see things clearly sometimes. She saw that I care about you both more than I should, perhaps. The confession hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Catherine had negotiated billion-dollar deals without her pulse racing like this. She'd stared down hostile board members and predatory investors with perfect composure. But admitting to Daniel Hayes that she felt something, wanted something, needed something beyond her empire of silicon and strategy that required a courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Before Daniel could respond, Catherine's phone buzzed insistently against the table. She glanced down at the screen. 43 messages from Paige Calloway, her assistant. The word emergency flashed repeatedly. Marcus was making his move. Daniel followed her gaze to the phone. Take it. I know who you are, Catherine. Your company needs you. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the device. Every instinct she'd honed over 15 years screamed at her to answer, to handle the crisis, to protect what she'd built. But something else, something newer and more terrifying, whispered that maybe just this once she could choose differently. Catherine turned the phone face down on the table, silencing it. No, not tonight. Tonight I need to say something I've been rehearsing for weeks. She reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, the slight calluses from years of holding cameras, the strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. I've waited long enough. Tonight we begin our future together. If you want that too. Daniel stared at their joined hands, his expression cycling through surprise, hope, fear, and something that looked dangerously close to joy. Catherine, and there's something you should know about Emmy and me, something that might change how you see this possibility between us. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as a pianist began playing in the corner. Melancholy notes underscoring whatever revelation Daniel was about to make. Catherine squeezed his hand, refusing to let go. Tell me. 5 years ago, Emmy was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a rare heart condition. The medical bills, that's the real reason I'm struggling. The photography business is doing fine, but the treatments... He swallowed hard, his thumb moving unconsciously against her palm. I didn't tell you because I didn't want your pity or your money. Is she okay now? She's stable, but there will always be specialists, medications, unexpected hospital stays. It's not the carefree life I wanted to give her, and it's certainly not the baggage someone like you signed up for. Catherine felt something hot and fierce surge through her chest. Someone like me. You think I'm afraid of challenges, Daniel. I built a technology empire from the ground up in an industry that wanted me to fail. I've faced board rebellions and hostile takeovers. I've weathered economic crashes that destroyed my competitors. This is different. His voice carried an edge of desperation. Yes. Catherine held his gaze, refusing to let him look away. This is more important. Emmy is more important. You are more important. The conviction in her voice seemed to surprise them both. Catherine had spent 15 years building walls between herself and anything that could hurt her. Caring about people meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant weakness. Weakness meant failure. But looking at Daniel across the table, his hand warm in hers, his daughter sleeping safely at home with a sitter, Catherine realized she'd been failing all along. She'd been winning battles and losing the war against her own isolation. I don't need a perfect life, Daniel. I need a real one, with real love, real challenges, real purpose beyond quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Her phone lit up again, vibrating insistently against the table. This time, Catherine saw the preview of Paige's text. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Vote of no confidence. Evidence of mismanagement attached. The world narrowed to that single line of text. Marcus wasn't waiting until Monday. He was striking now while Catherine sat at dinner, distracted and vulnerable. The smart play would be to leave immediately, spend the night preparing her defense, calling board members, mobilizing her resources. The smart play had kept her alive in corporate warfare for 15 years. Daniel noticed the change in her expression before she could mask it. Catherine, what's wrong? She could lie, brush it off as nothing, pretend the empire wasn't burning while she sat here confessing feelings she'd kept locked away for months. But Daniel had given her honesty about Emmy's condition, about his financial struggles, about the fear that Catherine would decide they weren't worth the trouble. She owed him the same truth. It seems I may be fighting for my company sooner than I expected. Someone's making a move against me. Daniel started to pull his hand back. Then we should end this evening now. You need to prepare. No. Catherine's grip tightened on his fingers, refusing to let him withdraw. That's exactly what I've always done. Sacrifice the personal for the professional. Not tonight. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the CEO emerge, even as some softer version of herself fought to stay present. Besides, I think better when I'm not alone in my office overthinking every scenario. Daniel smiled, and Catherine saw understanding in his expression. Not pity, not concern, but recognition. Then let's think together. After dinner. The waiter arrived with their entrees, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Catherine found herself sharing details about the board tensions she'd never discussed with anyone. Marcus's subtle undermining over the past months, the irregular expense reports her internal auditor had flagged, the way he'd positioned himself as the reasonable alternative to Catherine's supposedly erratic leadership. Daniel listened with an intensity that reminded Catherine why she'd been drawn to him in the first place. Most men in her life wanted something from her. Daniel just wanted to understand her. The distinction felt profound. You know, she said, studying him over her wine glass, you understand business strategy better than half my executive team. Daniel's smile turned self-deprecating. Former marketing director before I followed my passion for photography. Not all of us were born to be CEOs. And not all CEOs were born to be only that. Catherine's voice went soft, the admission costing her something. I've built Apex into everything I dreamed. But lately I wonder what I sacrificed to get here. What did you sacrifice? This. Catherine gestured between them, the word encompassing more than just the table in the restaurant in the evening. Connection, vulnerability, the possibility of caring about someone more than the next board meeting. Daniel set down his fork, his full attention on her now. And is that what you want, to care about someone more than the next board meeting? I want to care about you more than the next board meeting. I want to care about Emmy. I want Sunday mornings that don't involve conference calls and evenings that don't end with me alone in my penthouse, convinced that success means isolation. Catherine paused, feeling exposed in a way no boardroom battle had ever made her feel. I've waited long enough to admit that to myself. I'm choosing to admit it to you. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation around them, other diners absorbed in their own private dramas. But Catherine felt like she and Daniel existed in a bubble outside normal time, suspended in a moment that would define everything that came after. Daniel stood abruptly, and Catherine's heart sank. She'd pushed too hard, revealed too much, scared him away with the intensity of feelings he hadn't asked for. But then he was beside her chair, offering his hand. Come on. Where are we going? Outside. I need to do something I've been thinking about for 6 months, and I can't do it with 50 people watching. Catherine took his hand and let him lead her through the restaurant, past the curious stares of other diners. The cool November air hit her face as they stepped onto the sidewalk, Chicago's evening traffic flowing past in ribbons of light. Daniel pulled her into a shadowed alcove beside the restaurant entrance, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. I'm about to kiss you, he said, his voice low and rough. If that's not what you want, tell me now. Catherine had built a career on always having the perfect response. Words failed her completely. She just nodded, and Daniel closed the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined during all those nights alone in her penthouse. It wasn't tentative or questioning. Daniel kissed her like he knew exactly what he wanted, his mouth firm against hers, one hand sliding into her carefully styled hair and completely destroying hours of professional grooming. Catherine didn't care. She kissed him back with 15 years of suppressed wanting, her fingers gripping the lapels of his borrowed suit. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you told me my business plan needed work." Catherine laughed, the sound foreign and wonderful. "That was our second meeting." "I know." Daniel's thumb brushed her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "I've been terrified of this. Of you. Of what it would mean for Emmy if I let someone into our lives and it didn't work out. And now I'm still terrified, but I'm more terrified of not trying." He stepped back slightly, his hands dropping to his sides. "I meant what I said about Emmy. Her condition isn't going away. The medical bills aren't going away. If you're looking for an uncomplicated relationship with a successful, stable man, I'm not that person." Catherine straightened her dress, trying to reassemble some version of her professional composure, and failing completely. Her hair was a mess, her lipstick undoubtedly smeared, and she didn't care at all. "I've made my decision, Daniel. Whatever happens tomorrow with the board, I'm choosing us. I've built enough empires. It's time to build something that matters more." Daniel's phone rang before he could respond, the shrill sounds shattering their bubble. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "It's Northwestern Medicine, the emergency department." Every trace of softness vanished from his expression, replaced by the focused fear of a parent whose child is in danger. He answered immediately, listening to whoever was on the other end. Catherine watched the color drain further from his face. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and looked at Catherine, his eyes wide. "Emmy, she had an episode. Constance took her to the ER." Catherine didn't hesitate. "My car is 2 blocks away. I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "Daniel," she gripped his arm, feeling him trembling. "I just told you I'm all in. This is what all in means. Let's go." They ran the 2 blocks to her parking garage, Catherine's heels clicking against the pavement in rhythm with her racing heart. The Mercedes was exactly where she'd left it, and she had them on Lakeshore Drive heading north in under 3 minutes. Daniel sat rigidly in the passenger seat, his phone clutched in his hand. "The doctor said she's stable. Constance called them when Emmy started having palpitations." His voice sounded hollow. "Rachel was watching her. She panicked when Emmy said her heart was racing." "Does this happen often?" "Often enough that I should have been there." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "I should have been home with her, not at some expensive restaurant pretending I can have a normal life." Catherine wanted to argue, to tell him he deserved happiness, that one dinner didn't make him a bad father. But she'd known Daniel long enough to recognize when he was spiraling into guilt. She drove faster, weaving through Chicago traffic with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from 15 years of treating life like a series of obstacles to overcome. Northwestern Medicine's emergency department blazed with fluorescent light against the November darkness. Catherine pulled into the parking lot and had barely stopped before Daniel was out of the car, sprinting toward the entrance. She followed, her heels abandoned in the car, running in stockinged feet across cold pavement. Inside, the waiting room held exactly the scene Catherine had been dreading. Constance and Philip Winters stood near the reception desk, and their expressions, when they saw Daniel and Catherine together, could have frozen Lake Michigan. Constance was a handsome woman in her mid-60s, her gray hair styled into a perfect bob, her posture military straight. She looked at Catherine like an invasive species that needed immediate eradication. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. You're out on dates while your daughter is having cardiac episodes." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I was at dinner. Emmy was with Rachel, who I trust completely. This could have happened anywhere with anyone. Rachel called us when Emmy started having palpitations because she didn't know what to do." Philip Winters was a tall man with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. "We've been saying you're overwhelmed, Daniel. Tonight proves it." Catherine felt Daniel's hand on her arm, a gentle pressure that stopped her from launching into the defense already forming. She watched him take a breath, watched him choose calm over anger, even though she could see the fury vibrating beneath his composure. "Sophie's condition is unpredictable, Philip. Tonight's episode could have happened if she'd been with me, with you, with anyone. What matters is that she's getting care. A doctor emerged from the treatment area, his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Hayes, Emmy's asking for you, and for... He glanced at his notes. Miss Catherine. Constance's face went rigid. Who is Miss Catherine? The nurse beside the doctor offered helpfully. The lady from the photos in Emmy's room. Emmy talks about her constantly. The moment crystallized into something Catherine would remember for the rest of her life. Constance Winter's shock, Philip's disapproval. Daniel's mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been hope, and her own sudden understanding that Emmy Hayes had already made space for Catherine in her life, whether or not the adults had figured out what they were doing. I'm Catherine Sterling. She stepped forward, meeting Constance's glare without flinching. And yes, I'd like to see Emmy, if that's all right. The doctor led them back before anyone could object further. Emmy lay in a hospital bed looking impossibly small, her dark hair spread across the pillow monitors, beeping softly beside her. But when she saw Catherine and Daniel together, her face lit up with a smile that made Catherine's chest ache. You came, Dad said you were busy tonight. Catherine crossed to the bed and sat carefully on its edge, taking Emmy's hand. The girl's fingers felt cold and fragile, nothing like the confident child who'd asked pointed questions about stellar evolution the last time Catherine had visited Daniel's studio. Never too busy for you, sweetheart. Emmy's smile faltered. Grammy and Grampy are mad at Dad. It's my fault for getting sick. It's nobody's fault. Catherine squeezed Emmy's hand gently. Bodies are complicated. Your heart is working hard to keep you healthy, and sometimes it needs a little extra help. That's not bad or wrong, it just is. Did you and Dad have a good dinner before I ruined it? Catherine glanced at Daniel, who stood at the foot of the bed looking like he might shatter. You didn't ruin anything. And yes, we had a very good dinner. Emmy studied Catherine's face with that unnerving perception. Are you going to be around more? Or is this another time when the grown-ups say things but don't mean them? The question hit harder than any hostile board member's attack. Catherine thought about Emmy's mother dead 3 years in a car accident. She thought about all the well-meaning people who'd probably promised stability and then disappeared when the reality of Emmy's condition became inconvenient. She thought about her own instinct to protect herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. Then she thought about Daniel's kiss in the alcove outside the restaurant, about the way Emmy drew pictures of the three of them together, about the choice she'd made to stop building empires and start building something real. Sophie, I can't promise I have all the answers, but I promise I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to. Okay. Emmy's eyes filled with tears, and Catherine felt her own throat tighten. The girl nodded, then closed her eyes, exhausted from the evening's drama. Catherine stayed beside her until Emmy's breathing evened into sleep, her small hands still wrapped around Catherine's fingers. Outside Emmy's room, Constance waited like a storm about to break. Who are you to make promises to my granddaughter? Catherine straightened to her full height, feeling the Ice Queen snap back into place like armor. Someone who cares about her well-being. You're the CEO Daniel photographed, the billionaire. Constance's voice dripped contempt. Is this some kind of charity case for you slumming with the struggling photographer and his sick child? Daniel stepped between them. Constance, enough. Philip joined his wife, forming a united front. We're filing for custody, Daniel. You can't provide a stable environment. Tonight proves it. Between your financial struggles and now this inappropriate relationship, then I'll see you in court. Daniel's voice could have cut glass. The Winters left without another word, their footsteps echoing down the hospital corridor. Daniel sagged against the wall, all the adrenaline draining out of him at once. Catherine wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but suddenly the space between them felt vast and complicated. I'm sorry you had to see that. Catherine shook her head. Don't apologize for people trying to protect Emmy, even if they're wrong about you. They're not completely wrong. Daniel ran both hands through his hair. I am overwhelmed. I am struggling financially. I can't promise Emmy the stable life she deserves. But you're not failing her. There's a difference, Vermile. The doctor approached with Emmy's discharge papers. The palpitations had been anxiety-induced, not a cardiac emergency. Medication adjustment needed. Follow up with her cardiologist next week. Daniel signed everything mechanically, and Catherine found herself driving them home through streets that had emptied since dinner. Emmy fell asleep at the back seat almost immediately. Daniel gave directions to his apartment in Lincoln Park, and Catherine navigated the quiet streets, feeling like she'd stepped into an alternate version of her life. She'd never driven a child anywhere. She'd never dealt with hospital discharge papers or anxious grandparents, or the complicated reality of loving someone who came with responsibilities that couldn't be strategized away. She'd never wanted to more than she did right now. Daniel's apartment was a modest two-bedroom on the third floor of a well-maintained building. Catherine waited in the living room while he carried Emmy to her bedroom, listening to the soft murmur of his voice as he settled her for the night. The space around her told stories Catherine was only beginning to understand: photos of Lisa everywhere. Emmy's art projects covering the refrigerator, Daniel's cameras arranged on a bookshelf beside astronomy texts and children's books about grief. This was real life, messy and complicated, and nothing like the pristine perfection of Catherine's penthouse. She loved it immediately. Daniel returned to find Catherine studying a photo on the mantel: Daniel, Lisa, and a much younger Emmy at Navy Pier, all of them laughing at something off camera. That was 6 months before Lisa died. Emmy was 7, still healthy, still innocent of everything that was coming. You loved her. Not a question. I did. For 15 years, she was my whole world. Daniel's voice carried no defensiveness, just honest grief. And then she was gone, and I had to figure out how to be enough for Emmy on my own. Catherine turned to face him. You are enough, more than enough. Am I? Because tonight, while I was kissing you in that alcove, my daughter was having a cardiac episode that terrified her badly enough that my dead wife's parents are now filing for custody. You tell me how I'm supposed to believe I'm enough. The rawness in his voice nearly undid her. Catherine crossed to him, took his face in her hands the way he'd done with hers outside the restaurant. Daniel Hayes, you are a good father. You are not responsible for Emmy's heart condition. You are not responsible for your in-laws' fear. You are doing everything right, and sometimes right still includes trips to the emergency room. That's not failure, that's just life. Daniel's eyes searched hers, looking for something Catherine hoped she could provide. I don't know how to do this. How to let you in without risking Emmy getting hurt if it doesn't work out. I don't know either, Catherine admitted. I've never done this before. Cared about someone enough that failure would actually matter. But I know I want to try. If you'll let me. The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Daniel's apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Chicago traffic. Catherine could see him thinking, weighing, trying to calculate odds in a situation where math didn't apply. Finally, he spoke. Stay, just for a few hours, until I'm sure Emmy's really okay. I have a board meeting in 9 hours. I know. Daniel managed a tired smile. But you said you were all in. I'm testing that claim. Catherine pulled out her phone and saw the notifications stacking up. 73 messages from Paige now. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for noon tomorrow. Marcus had leaked his evidence to the business press. Apex's stock had already dropped 2 points in after-hours trading. Her entire empire was on fire, and she was standing in a photographer's modest apartment, choosing between the smart strategic play and something she couldn't even name. She silenced her phone completely and slipped it into her purse. Where's your couch? Daniel led her to a worn leather sofa that had definitely seen better days. Catherine kicked off her heels and sat, and Daniel settled beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither spoke. They just sat in the quiet darkness of his apartment while Emmy slept safely down the hall, and Catherine's professional life imploded in 73 unread messages. Daniel's breathing evened out, first exhaustion, finally claiming him. Catherine followed soon after, her head resting against his shoulder, her hand loosely clasped in his. As sleep pulled her under, her last thought was that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. Her phone sat dark and silent in her purse, the number 43 glowing briefly before the screen went black. Catherine woke to the sensation of being watched. Emmy Hayes stood 3 feet away, clutching a stuffed astronomy-themed bear, her expression caught between curiosity and something that looked like calculation. Dawn light filtered through Daniel's curtains, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. You're still here. Not quite an accusation, not quite relief. Catherine sat up slowly, hyper-aware that she'd slept in her dinner dress, that her carefully constructed professional image had dissolved into wrinkled silk and yesterday's makeup. Your dad and I talked late. I fell asleep on the couch. Emmy's gaze didn't waver. Grammy Constance says ladies who sleep over are trying to trap men. Footsteps from the hallway announced Daniel before he appeared, his hair standing in several directions, still wearing yesterday's dress shirt with the collar open. Emmy, that's incredibly rude. Emmy shrugged with the brutal honesty of 11-year-olds. I'm just repeating what she said. Catherine watched the mortification spread across Daniel's face and felt an unexpected laugh bubbling up. The Ice Queen of Apex Technologies rumpled and barefoot in a stranger's apartment, being lectured on proper etiquette by a child. The board meeting started in 6 hours. Her empire was burning. And somehow, standing here in the wreckage of her professional composure, Catherine felt more present than she had in years. Your grandmother has strong opinions. Catherine stood smoothing her dress with limited success. I should go. Let you both have your morning. Emmy's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her features. Are you coming back? The question landed like a punch. Catherine looked at Daniel, who was studiously examining his coffee maker with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. She thought about the choice she'd made last night, turning off her phone while Marcus orchestrated her downfall. She thought about the kiss in the alcove and Emmy's cold hand in the hospital. She thought about all the safe, strategic decisions she'd made in 15 years that had left her powerful and completely alone. Yes, if you and your dad want me to. Emmy nodded once satisfied and disappeared back into her bedroom. Daniel finally looked up from the coffee maker, his expression unreadable. You don't have to make promises you're not sure you can keep. I don't make promises I'm not sure about. Catherine located her heels by the couch, slipped them on, felt the armor of professionalism trying to reassemble itself. I need to go home, change and prepare to potentially lose everything I've built. But Daniel, what I said last night stands. All of it. He crossed to her, reached up to tuck a strand of platinum hair behind her ear. The gesture was so casual, so intimate, that Catherine felt her breath catch. What if you have to choose your company or this? Then I choose this. The words came without hesitation, surprising them both. I've already decided, whether or not you believe me. Daniel kissed her morning breath and all his hand cupping the back of her neck. When they separated, his thumb traced her jawline. I believe you. I'm just terrified of what it might cost you. Catherine's phone, still silenced in her purse, had accumulated 117 new messages during the night. She extracted it, watched the notifications cascade across the screen, felt the weight of crisis settling back onto her shoulders. I should go. The board meeting is at noon. Win or lose, Catherine smiled, remembering his words from last night. Win or lose, you're still here. The drive back to her penthouse took 30 minutes through Sunday morning traffic. Chicago spread out around her, the city waking slowly into November sunshine. Catherine's mind cycled through potential board scenarios, Marcus's likely arguments, the evidence he might have manufactured. But underneath the strategic planning, she kept returning to Emmy's question. Are you coming back? Her penthouse felt like a museum when she walked in. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, in shades of white and steel art that cost more than most people's annual salaries hanging on walls nobody ever saw. No photos of family, no evidence that a human being actually lived here. Just the pristine showcase of a woman who'd confused success with existence. Catherine showered, washing away the hospital smell and the sweetness of Daniel's borrowed soap. She dressed in her most severe power suit, navy Armani, that cost $4,000, and communicated exactly the message she needed, untouchable. Diamond studs, hair pulled back so tightly her scalp ached, war paint disguised as makeup. Paige Calloway was already in the penthouse when Catherine emerged, her assistant's normally unflappable demeanor cracking around the edges. Paige had been with Catherine for 5 years, a ruthlessly efficient redhead who treated crisis management like an Olympic sport. Where were you? No judgment in the question, just desperate need for information. I've been calling all night. Catherine poured coffee that tasted like ash and sat down at her home office desk. Tell me everything. Paige's briefing was comprehensive and devastating. Marcus had sent his resignation to the board at midnight, effective immediately. He'd scheduled a press conference for 9 this morning at the offices of Nexatech, Apex's primary competitor. He'd leaked selected emails and financial reports to 3 major business publications, all suggesting Catherine had been prioritizing personal interests over company welfare. The stock had dropped 8 points in pre-market trading, Two major clients had already called requesting emergency meetings to discuss leadership concerns. He's painting you as distracted, erratic, emotionally compromised. Paige pulled up articles on her tablet, sliding it across the desk. Business Insider is running with Ice Queen melts, has Catherine Sterling lost her edge? TechCrunch went with Apex in crisis as CEO reportedly dating vendor. Catherine felt ice crystallize in her veins. They named Daniel. Not yet, but there are photos from last night. You and a man leaving Alinea. Someone sold them to the gossip blogs. Paige's expression turned sympathetic. Catherine, if there's something going on that could be considered a conflict of interest. Daniel Hayes is a photographer I hired for the annual report. We are dating. There is no conflict of interest because I haven't given him preferential treatment, additional contracts, or anything that could be considered inappropriate. Catherine's voice could have frozen Lake Michigan. Marcus is manufacturing scandal where none exists. The board won't see it that way, not with the other evidence. Catherine pulled up Marcus's leaked emails, scanning them with practiced speed. He'd been thorough. Every board meeting she'd missed while investigating him framed as negligence. Every strategic decision she'd made without full board consultation positioned as autocratic overreach. The rejection of Nexitech's partnership proposal painted as irrational personal vendetta. And woven through it all, the implication that Catherine Sterling, who'd built Apex on ice-cold calculation, had become emotionally compromised by a struggling photographer with a sick child. Marcus was weaponizing her first attempt at human connection in 15 years. What time is Marcus's press conference? 9, it's streaming live. Every tech journalist in Chicago will be there. Paige hesitated. You could fight back. Go public with your investigation into him. The expense irregularities, the Nexitech communications. Catherine thought about Grant Morrison, the private investigator she'd hired 2 months ago. Grant was ex-FBI, meticulous, expensive. He'd found enough to raise serious questions about Marcus's activities, but nothing conclusive enough to present to law enforcement. The offshore transfers could be legitimate consulting fees. The Nexitech meetings could be innocent networking. Marcus had been careful. What we have won't hold up against what he's presenting, not without more time to investigate. Catherine set down her coffee's decision, crystallizing. I'm going to do something I should have done months ago. I'm going to tell the truth. Paige's eyebrows rose. The truth? Marcus has been positioning himself for my job since January. I suspected it, but couldn't prove it definitively. When the expense irregularities surfaced, I launched a quiet investigation instead of bringing it to the board immediately. That was a mistake born of wanting to protect the company from scandal. Once Catherine stood pacing to the windows. I am in a relationship with Daniel Hayes. It's new, it's complicated, and it has absolutely nothing to do with my ability to run this company. The board will crucify you for the investigation delay. Probably. Catherine watched the city below, thinking about Emmy's question, about Daniel's fear about the choice she'd already made. But I'm done pretending to be something I'm not. If they fire me for being human, then maybe I don't want to work for them. Paige looked like Catherine had announced her intention to join the circus. Who are you, and what have you done with my boss? Catherine smiled without humor. I met someone who reminded me that success without a life is just elaborate failure. Now let's watch Marcus try to destroy me. The press conference streamed from Nexitech's corporate headquarters at 9 sharp. Marcus stood flanked by Nexitech's CEO and legal team, looking appropriately grave. He opened with expressions of regret, praised Catherine's historical contributions to Apex, then methodically dismantled her reputation with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Catherine watched from her penthouse, Paige beside her, both of them silent as Marcus painted his narrative. The numbers he presented weren't fabricated. They were carefully selected facts arranged to tell a lie. Catherine had missed board meetings, but only while investigating him. She had killed the Nexitech partnership, but because she suspected Marcus of selling proprietary information. Every true detail spun into damning fiction. Then came the part Catherine had been dreading. I can no longer support a CEO who puts personal interests above company welfare. While I respect Miss Sterling's right to a private life, the timing and nature of her recent relationship raised serious questions about judgment and priorities. He didn't name Daniel, didn't have to. The implication hung in the air. Catherine Sterling, legendary ice queen, had melted for some man and lost her edge in the process. The tech industry's fundamental sexism did the rest of the work. Generations of women judged more harshly than men for having the audacity to want both career and personal life. Catherine's phone exploded with calls, board members, investors, clients, journalists. She ignored them all except one, Daniel. His voice carried an edge of panic. Are you watching this, Catherine? He's talking about us. Without saying our names, he's talking about us. I know. Emmy heard Grammy Constance on the phone this morning. She's moving forward with the custody suit immediately, using last night's hospital visit as evidence that I can't provide stability. Daniel's breath came harsh through the phone. The media attention, if this gets worse, Catherine, I can't have Emmy's face in tabloids. She's 11. She has a medical condition. The stress could actually be dangerous. Catherine felt the walls closing and all her careful construction of a different life crumbling before it had even begun. I'm not going to let Marcus destroy you because of me. That's not what I'm saying. But the fear in Daniel's voice told a different story. I just need to think about Emmy first, always. I know you do. That's one of the reasons I love you. Silence on the other end of the line. Catherine's heart stopped. She'd said it out loud, the thing she had barely admitted to herself at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible circumstances. Daniel's voice, when he spoke again, sounded wrecked. Catherine, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. Catherine watched Marcus conclude his press conference, watched her career detonate in real time. I have a board meeting in 3 hours. After that, win or lose, can I see you? Yes, always yes. The line went dead. Catherine set down her phone and turned to Paige. Get me Gerald Hoffman on the line. Private number, not the office. I need to speak with him before the board meeting. Gerald Hoffman had been Catherine's first major investor, the venture capitalist who'd seen potential in a 27-year-old woman with a garage startup and a dream of revolutionizing AI. He answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 40 years in Silicon Valley. Catherine, I assume you're calling about Marcus's little performance this morning. I'm calling to tell you the truth before the board meeting. You deserve that. She told him everything. The investigation into Marcus, her relationship with Daniel, the choice she'd made last night to put personal connection ahead of crisis management. Gerald listened without interruption, and when Catherine finished, he was quiet for so long she thought the connection had dropped. Finally, you're in love with him, this photographer. Yes. And his daughter. The one with the heart condition. Yes. Does he make you happy? The question caught Catherine off guard. In 15 years of working with Gerald, he'd never asked her about happiness. Profits, market share, strategic positioning, yes. Happiness had never entered the equation. He makes me remember what it feels like to be human. I didn't realize I'd forgotten until I met him. Gerald's laugh was rough. I've been divorced 3 times, Catherine. Built 4 companies, made $2 billion, and I don't have a single person who'd visit me in the hospital except my broker. You know what I'd trade it all for? What you found last night sleeping on that photographer's couch. I might lose Apex. You might, or you might not. The board meeting will tell. But Catherine, listen to me. I've watched you build this company into something extraordinary. I've also watched you build yourself into a prison. Whatever happens today, don't lose what you found. Men like me were cautionary tales. Don't become one. The board meeting convened at noon in Apex's executive conference room. Catherine arrived 15 minutes early, claiming her seat at the head of the table. 9 board members total, including her. Gerald sat 2 seats down, his expression carefully neutral. Sloan Blackwell, the tech entrepreneur who'd proposed the compromise solution months ago, offered Catherine a small nod. The others avoided eye contact. Marcus's empty chair sat like an accusation. David Park, Apex's general counsel, called the meeting to order. Gerald, as board chair, presented the situation with brutal efficiency. Marcus's resignation, his allegations, the media coverage, the stock drop, the client concerns. Then he opened the floor. Board member Carson Williams, a finance executive who'd always resented Catherine's unconventional approach, spoke first. Let's address the elephant in the room, said Sterling, are you romantically involved with Daniel Hayes, a vendor contracted by this company? Catherine met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Daniel Hayes photographed our annual report. We began dating recently. I have not given him preferential treatment, additional contracts, or any consideration beyond his initial fee, which was competitive market rate. The optics are terrible. This from Diane Morrison, a former Fortune 500 CEO who joined the board 2 years ago. Whether or not there's actual impropriety, this creates the appearance of compromised judgment. My judgment regarding Daniel Hayes is personal, not professional. My judgment regarding Marcus Thornton's activities was to investigate quietly rather than create immediate public scandal. In hindsight, I should have brought my concerns to this board sooner. Catherine pulled up the files Grant Morrison had compiled, but those concerns remain valid. Marcus had inappropriate communications with Nexitech. His expense reports show irregularities. His wife's consulting company received inflated fees for questionable services. She walked them through the evidence, watching board members' expressions shift from hostile to uncertain. Grant had done thorough work. The problem was that thorough didn't mean conclusive. Carson Williams studied the financial reports, his frown deepening. This warrants investigation, but Marcus's accusations stand independently. You missed 12 board meetings this quarter, Catherine. You declined 3 major investor calls. Department heads report that you've been distant, distracted. I was investigating my CFO for potential fraud while trying to avoid creating panic. That required discretion. Catherine felt the Ice Queen crystallizing around her, again protective armor against vulnerability. I made strategic choices about where to focus my attention. Some of those choices in retrospect were wrong, but they weren't made from weakness or distraction. They were made from a desire to protect this company. Sloan Blackwell leaned forward. What about the personal relationship? The timing seems suspect. Catherine could lie, frame her relationship with Daniel as something that developed after the investigation began, minimize its importance, sacrifice her one attempt at genuine human connection on the altar of professional survival. She looked around the table at 9 people who'd never asked her about happiness in 15 years. I met Daniel Hayes 6 months ago. I investigated Marcus's activities starting 2 months ago. The relationships developed independently. As for whether my personal life affected my professional judgment, yes, it did. It made me realize that building empires without building a life is ultimately empty. It made me question whether being CEO of Apex is still what I want. The room went silent. Catherine had just committed the ultimate corporate sin, suggesting that something might matter more than the company. Gerald's expression remained neutral, but she saw something shift in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. So you're admitting that you're compromised. Carson Williams looked triumphant. That personal considerations are affecting your ability to lead. I'm admitting that I'm human. If that's disqualifying, then perhaps I'm not the right leader for this board. Catherine stood decision, crystallizing with the certainty that had built her empire. I propose the following. I will step down as CEO effective in 6 months. During that time, I'll work with you to identify and train my successor. I'll transition to executive chair, maintaining strategic oversight without day-to-day operational responsibility. That gives Apex stability, gives me time to determine what I actually want, and gives this board the change it apparently needs. The silence that followed felt like falling. Catherine had just offered to give up the position she'd fought for, killed herself for, sacrificed everything for. And standing in that conference room with 9 shocked board members, she felt lighter than she had in years. Gerald spoke first. I'll support that proposal. Anyone else? Sloan Blackwell raised her hand. I support it, with the caveat that we continue the investigation into Marcus's activities. One by one hands rose. 6 votes in favor, 3 against. Catherine Sterling would remain CEO for 6 more months, then transition to a less demanding role. She'd won technically. Kept her position, maintained her influence, avoided complete destruction. It felt like the first real victory she'd had in 15 years. The meeting adjourned at 2:15. Catherine fielded brief conversations with individual board members, accepted Gerald's cryptic, "You made the right choice," and extracted herself as quickly as possible. Paige waited outside the conference room, her expression anxious. How bad? I keep my job for 6 months, then transition to executive chair. Marcus's investigation continues. Stock should stabilize once we announce the plan. Catherine kept walking toward the elevators. I need you to draft a press release. Position this as planned succession, strategic evolution, all the usual corporate euphemisms. Where are you going? Catherine hit the elevator button, feeling her phone already buzzing with calls she had no intention of answering. To have dinner with my boyfriend and his daughter, like a normal human being. Paige's expression suggested Catherine had announced her intention to join the circus, but she nodded. I'll handle the press release, Catherine. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. The elevator doors closed on Paige's approval, and Catherine allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to process what had just happened. She'd survived. Barely. She'd kept her company by agreeing to eventually let it go. She'd chosen Daniel and Emmy over absolute power, and she felt absolutely certain she'd made the right choice. Daniel's apartment building looked different in afternoon light, less intimidating somehow. Catherine had texted from the car, a simple message. Board meeting done. Still want company for dinner. His response came immediately. Emmy's been asking about you all day. We're making pizza. Bring wine if you want. Or don't. Just bring yourself. Catherine stopped at a wine shop anyway, selecting a bottle that cost more than Daniel probably spent on groceries in a week. Then on impulse, she ducked into a toy store and bought an actual telescope, not the cheap plastic kind, but a real beginner's model that Emmy could use to explore the night sky she loved so much. $300 seemed reasonable for a peace offering to an 11-year-old who'd watched her father's life explode that morning. Emmy answered the door, her face cycling through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope. You came. Dad said you might be too tired. Catherine held out the telescope box. I'm never too tired for pizza night, and I thought you might like this. Emmy's eyes went wide. Is that a real telescope? Real enough for amateur astronomy. Your dad mentioned you're interested in stellar evolution. Might be nice to see the stars yourself instead of just reading about them. For a moment, Catherine thought she'd miscalculated. The gift was too much too soon, overstepping boundaries she didn't yet have permission to cross. Then Emmy threw her arms around Catherine's waist, squeezing tight enough that Catherine felt the breath leave her lungs. Thank you. This is the best present anyone's ever given me. Over Emmy's head, Catherine saw Daniel in the kitchen doorway, his expression doing complicated things. She mouthed too much, and he shook his head, but his eyes looked suspiciously bright. The pizza-making process was exactly the chaos Catherine should have anticipated. Emmy took charge with the confidence of a child who'd grown up helping her father cook, explaining proper dough-tossing technique while flour settled over every available surface. Catherine's $4,000 suit acquired a layer of white powder that would probably require professional cleaning. She didn't care at all. Daniel worked beside her, their shoulders brushing as they assembled toppings. How bad was the board meeting? Catherine kept her voice low enough that Emmy focused on creating a perfectly circular crust wouldn't hear. I'm stepping down as CEO in 6 months, transitioning to executive chair. Daniel's hands stilled over the bell peppers he'd been chopping. Because of me. Because of me. Because I realized that running Apex the way I have been was killing everything else in my life. Catherine reached over and took his hand, not caring that they were both covered in pizza ingredients. I'm not giving up the company entirely, just the part that required me to sacrifice being human. Emmy looked up from her dough. Miss Catherine, are you putting pepperoni on your pizza? Catherine released Daniel's hand and surveyed the toppings. What do you recommend? Pepperoni, mushrooms, and black olives. That's Dad's favorite. Emmy paused, then added shyly, it's my favorite too. Maybe it could be yours. The offer felt like acceptance, like Emmy tentatively welcoming Catherine into their private family rituals. Catherine's throat tightened unexpectedly. That sounds perfect. They ate pizza at Daniel's small kitchen table, Emmy monopolizing the conversation with enthusiastic explanations of her latest astronomy obsession. Catherine listened, genuinely fascinated by the child's intelligence and the way Daniel engaged with her interests. This was what a real family looked like, she realized. Not the pristine perfection of magazine spreads, but flour-dusted chaos and easy laughter, and people who actually knew each other. After Emmy went to bed, Daniel and Catherine tackled the kitchen disaster together. Washing dishes side by side felt more intimate than any boardroom victory Catherine had ever experienced. Daniel broke the comfortable silence first. Tell me about the meeting, really. Catherine explained everything: Marcus's strategy, the board's initial hostility, her decision to tell the truth instead of manufacturing a defense, the vote, Gerald's surprising support, her choice to step back from the CEO role. And you're okay with that, giving up something you've worked 15 years to build. I'm not giving it up. I'm transforming it into something sustainable. Catherine set down the dish she'd been drying. Daniel, what does this look like, you and me, because I can't do casual not with Emmy involved. I can't do casual either. I don't know how to do anything halfway. Daniel turned to face her fully. But I also don't know what the timeline is. When we tell people we're together, how we navigate all the complications. Catherine felt the question he wasn't asking. Was she ready for this to be real public? The kind of relationship that required introduction to friends and family, that involved school events and doctor's appointments and all the mundane intimacy of actually building a life together. I want to do this properly. Meet your friends. Have you meet my mother. Be present for Emmy's doctor's appointments if you want me there. Catherine paused, gathering courage. I want Sunday mornings that don't involve board meetings. I want to learn how to make pizza without destroying your kitchen. I want to be the person Emmy drew in that picture at Navy Pier. Daniel's smile started slow, spreading across his face like sunrise. You saw that picture. I saw it. I want to be worthy of it. He kissed her, then thorough and unhurried, his hands framing her face like she was something precious. When they broke apart, Daniel's expression had gone serious again. What if the custody battle gets worse? What if being with me costs you more than just the CEO position? Then I'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. Together. Catherine meant every word. I've spent 15 years protecting myself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But Daniel, you and Emmy, you are worth the risk. They moved to the couch, Catherine's head resting on Daniel's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic and Emmy's soft breathing from her bedroom. This was real life, Catherine thought. Messy and complicated and infinitely better than the sterile perfection she'd built around herself. I'm falling in love with you. Daniel's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Actually, I think I've been in love with you since you told me my business plan needed work and then spent 3 hours helping me fix it. Catherine turned her face into his shoulder, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time in years. I love you too. I told you that this morning, but you were panicking about Emmy, so I'm saying it again. I love you. I love your daughter. I love this life you've built, even though it's hard. Daniel's arms tightened around her. I'm still terrified. Good, so am I. Catherine lifted her head to look at him. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. Emmy's voice, small and scared, cut through the moment. Dad, I don't feel good. They both moved immediately, Daniel reaching Emmy's bedroom first. Catherine stood in the doorway, watching as Emmy sat up in bed, clutching her chest. The girl's face had gone pale, her breathing shallow. Daniel checked her pulse with practiced efficiency, his expression controlled, but his fear visible in the tension of his shoulders. What kind of not good sweetheart? My heart. It's doing the fast thing again. Catherine saw Daniel's jaw tighten as he pulled out his phone. She knew enough about Emmy's condition now to recognize this as potentially serious. The palpitations could be anxiety, like the night before, or they could signal something worse. Let me call Dr. Patel. Catherine, can you get Emmy's medication log from the kitchen counter? Catherine found the log, a meticulous record Daniel kept of every dose, every symptom, every change in Emmy's condition. The details spoke to his dedication as a father, the way he'd built his entire life around keeping his daughter healthy. Dr. Patel talked to Emmy directly over the phone, guiding her through breathing exercises while checking symptoms. After 10 minutes, he determined it was another anxiety-induced episode, not cardiac emergency. Monitor for 30 minutes. If symptoms persisted, emergency room. Emmy's heart rate had already started normalizing by the time the call ended. I'm sorry. Emmy's voice trembled on the edge of tears. I'm scared. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, taking Emmy's hand without thinking about whether she had permission. Scared of what? What if Dad marries you and then I get really sick and you leave because you don't want a sick kid? The words hit like a physical blow. Catherine looked at Daniel, saw her own shock reflected in his expression. They'd both assumed Emmy's resistance had been about replacing Lisa. Neither had considered that the child might fear abandonment for being imperfect. Emmy, look at me. Catherine waited until the girl's eyes met hers. I'm not going anywhere because you're sick. That's not how love works. Your heart condition doesn't make you broken or less valuable. It just makes you Emmy, and Emmy is exactly who I want in my life. But Grammy Constance says rich people don't like broken things. Catherine felt fury crystallize in her chest, cold and sharp. Your grandmother is wrong, and you're not broken. You're brilliant and brave in dealing with something incredibly hard. That takes strength most adults don't have. Emmy studied Catherine's face with that unnerving perception. You really mean that? I really mean that. I love your dad. I love you. And I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to. Emmy's breathing had steadied, her heart rate normalizing. She squeezed Catherine's hand. I don't want you to go. I was scared to say it, but I don't. Daniel sat on the other side of the bed, his hand resting on Emmy's shoulder. We're a team now, the three of us. Whatever comes next, we handle it together. Catherine stayed until Emmy fell asleep, her small hands still wrapped around Catherine's fingers. When they finally returned to the living room, both adults moved carefully like they'd survived something that left them fragile. She's been carrying that fear alone, Daniel's voice was rough. Thinking she's the reason people might leave. Thinking she's broken. Constance Winters has a lot to answer for. They love her. They just don't know how to show it without making Emmy feel defective. Daniel ran both hands through his hair. The custody battle is going to get worse. After this week with the media attention, they'll use everything against me. Catherine's phone, which she'd left on the coffee table, chose that moment to buzz insistently. She picked it up, saw Paige's name, and the preview of a text that made her blood run cold. Marcus just held another press conference. He's named you explicitly, and there are photos of you with Emmy. Catherine pulled up the news alerts, feeling her carefully constructed hope crumbling. Marcus had gone nuclear. His second press conference, held at 6 p.m., had included speculation about Catherine's inappropriate involvement with a vendor's family. Someone had photographed Catherine and Emmy at Daniel's apartment building, and those photos were already circulating online. The headlines wrote themselves, Apex CEO's secret life dating employee playing mother to sick child. Catherine Sterling's conflict of interest goes deeper than business. Ice Queen's meltdown, full timeline of erratic behavior. Daniel read over her shoulder, his body going rigid. They're using Emmy. They're putting her medical condition in the news. Catherine's phone rang. She answered without checking the caller ID, and Constance Winters' voice cut through like a knife. We're filing the custody petition tomorrow morning. You've created exactly the unstable environment we warned Daniel about. The media circus, the scandal, the stress, that's clearly affecting Emmeline's health. We have documentation from last night's hospital visit and tonight's episode. Mrs. Winters, my granddaughter's face is on gossip websites because of your relationship with her father. If you actually care about Emmeline, you'll end this before it destroys her. The call disconnected. Catherine set down her phone with exaggerated care, feeling something sharp and painful lodging in her chest. Constance was right. Not about Daniel being unfit, but about the consequences of Catherine's presence in their lives. The media attention, the stress, the ammunition for a custody battle. Daniel was already moving away from her, his expression closing down. Maybe we need to take a break, just until the custody thing is resolved. Catherine felt the words like a physical blow. You're breaking up with me because of media coverage. I'm protecting my daughter. If being with you costs me Emmy, I can't do it. Daniel's voice carried absolute conviction. Catherine, I love you, but I love her more, and if I have to choose, there's no choice. Catherine understood. Rationally, intellectually, she understood that Daniel was being a good father. But the part of her that had finally, after 15 years, allowed herself to want something beyond professional success, that part felt like it was shattering. So what do we do? I don't know. Daniel looked as wrecked as Catherine felt. I just know I can't risk Emmy. Not for anything. Emmy's voice, surprisingly strong, cut through their conversation. Stop making decisions about me without asking me. They both turned to find Emmy standing in her bedroom doorway, clutching her astronomy bear. How long she'd been listening, Catherine couldn't guess. but the expression on her face was pure determination. Dad, I know you're scared. I know you think Miss Catherine is going to make things worse, but she won't. Emmy crossed to them with the confidence of a child who'd made an important decision. Grammy and Grampy love me, but they don't understand my life. You do. Miss Catherine does. We're a team. Daniel's expression cycled through surprise, protest, and something that looked like awe. Emmy, the Winters could take you away from me. Then fight with Miss Catherine's help. Grammy thinks rich people don't care about broken things, but Miss Catherine does care. She came back after the hospital. She bought me a telescope. She told me I'm not broken. Emmy looked at Catherine with devastating clarity. You're not going to leave when things get hard, right? Catherine felt tears sliding down her face, the Ice Queen's armor, finally completely shattered. Right, I'm not leaving. Emmy turned back to Daniel. So we fight together. Don't let the mean newspaper people and Grammy's lawyers break us up. We're stronger together. Daniel stared at his 11-year-old daughter like he'd never seen her before. Then he pulled both Emmy and Catherine into a hug, his voice thick when he spoke. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't listen sometimes. Emmy's voice was muffled against Daniel's shoulder. Now can we please stop having grown-up drama? My heart can't take it. They laughed despite the tears, the three of them tangled together in Daniel's small living room, while Catherine's empire burned in the news cycle and the Winters prepared their legal assault. But standing there, Catherine felt more certain than she'd been about anything in 15 years. This was worth fighting for. Not just Daniel, not just Emmy, but the possibility of being something more than the Ice Queen who'd sacrificed everything for success. The possibility of being human. Her phone buzzed again. Another news alert, another attack from Marcus, another crisis demanding attention. Catherine silenced it without looking. I have work to do tonight. Press releases, to approve board members, to call damage control, to manage. She looked at Daniel, then Emmy. But tomorrow we sit down and figure out how to handle the custody battle. Together. As a team. Daniel's smile was exhausted but genuine. Together. As a team. Emmy nodded seriously. I'm going to draw a picture of us fighting bad guys, like superheroes. She disappeared back into her bedroom, leaving Catherine and Daniel alone. In the wreckage of the evening, Daniel pulled Catherine close, his forehead resting against hers. I'm sorry I panicked. I'm sorry I suggested breaking up. You were protecting Emmy, I understand. Catherine kissed him softly. But Daniel, we can't let fear make our decisions. Constance and Marcus are counting on us being too scared to fight back. Then we fight back. Daniel's voice carried new certainty. Whatever it takes. Catherine left Daniel's apartment at midnight, her suit still covered in pizza flour, her carefully constructed professional image in absolute ruins. The drive back to her penthouse took her through Chicago's night streets, past other lives being lived in lighted windows, past the possibility of everything she'd built crumbling to dust. Her phone showed 347 unread messages. The press coverage had escalated from business news to mainstream scandal. Apex's stock would open down tomorrow. Clients were threatening to jump ship. Board members who'd supported her that afternoon were already second-guessing their votes. Catherine thought about Emmy asking if she was coming back, about Daniel's kiss in the alcove, about the choice she'd made to stop building empires and start building something real. She pulled up her voice memo app and recorded a message to herself, something to remember when the battle got harder. Company can be rebuilt. Stock prices can recover. Board positions can be replaced. But the chance to be loved by people who see past the Ice Queen to whoever Catherine Sterling actually is underneath, that comes once in a lifetime. Don't lose it trying to win battles that don't matter. She sent the memo to Paige with a simple instruction. If I forget what's important, play this back to me. Then Catherine Sterling, recently demoted CEO of Apex Technologies, drove home to her empty penthouse to prepare for war. Not the kind she'd been waging for 15 years against competitors and market forces. The kind that mattered. Fighting for family, for love, for the possibility that success could mean something more than dollars and power. The headlines could burn. Marcus could scheme. The Winters could file their petitions. Catherine had found something worth fighting for, and she wasn't letting go without a battle that would make her corporate warfare look like practice. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which gave Catherine exactly 21 days to transform from CEO who'd never changed a diaper into someone a family court judge might believe belonged in Emmy Hayes' life. She attacked the challenge with the same strategic precision she'd once applied to hostile takeovers, except now the stakes felt infinitely higher. Morning one, Catherine arrived at Daniel's apartment at 6 a.m. with bagels and a plan. Emmy was still asleep, and Daniel looked rumpled in sweatpants and an old Northwestern t-shirt, his hair sticking up in directions that made Catherine want to smooth it down and mess it up further simultaneously. Tell me everything about Emmy's routine. Doctor appointments, medication schedule, school requirements, therapy sessions, everything. Daniel blinked sleep from his eyes, processing her intensity. You want to memorize my daughter's medical schedule? I want to demonstrate to a judge that I understand what being in Emmy's life actually requires, which means knowing what you deal with every single day. Catherine set down the bagels and pulled out a notebook. Also, I cleared my calendar for the next 3 weeks. No board meetings, no investor calls. Paige is handling day-to-day operations. I'm all in, Daniel. Time to prove it. They spent 2 hours mapping Emmy's complex medical needs before the girl woke up. 4 medications daily, 3 at specific times that couldn't vary by more than 30 minutes. Monthly cardiology appointments, quarterly MRI scans, annual cardiac catheterization, emergency protocols for different types of episodes. The name and number of every specialist Emmy had seen in 5 years. Daniel watched Catherine take notes with something like wonder in his expression. Most people's eyes glaze over after the first medication explanation. I'm not most people, and Emmy deserves someone who cares enough to understand. Catherine looked up from her notebook. What else? School accommodations, friend, situations, things that trigger anxiety? Emmy appeared in the doorway clutching her astronomy bear. Why are you here so early? Catherine smiled. Your dad's teaching me how to be useful. Want to help? The next 3 weeks unfolded in a crash course in practical domesticity that left Catherine simultaneously exhausted and more alive than she'd felt in years. She learned to cook meals that didn't come from restaurants. She attended Emmy's parent-teacher conference and discovered the girl was reading 3 grade levels above her peers, but struggling with PE due to cardiac restrictions. She sat through a specialist appointment and heard Dr. Patel explain the nuances of Emmy's specific condition with a patience that suggested he'd given this lecture many times. She also learned about Daniel's business in ways their coffee meetings had never revealed. Big Tom invited her to shadow a wedding shoot, and Catherine spent 8 hours watching Daniel work. The man was an artist with a camera seeing compositions nobody else noticed, putting anxious brides at ease with self-deprecating humor and genuine warmth. His technical skill was impressive, but his ability to capture authentic emotion in every frame that was genius. You're undercharging. Catherine reviewed his pricing sheet later that week while Emmy did homework at the kitchen table. Your work is worth double what you're asking. Daniel looked uncomfortable. The market won't bear higher prices for someone without formal photography credentials. The market will bear whatever you convince it to bear. You need a portfolio website that doesn't look like it was built in 2010, testimonials from satisfied clients prominently displayed, and a pricing structure that reflects your actual value. Catherine was already pulling up website builders on her laptop. Also, you need to start booking corporate clients more aggressively. They pay better than weddings in their year-round revenue. I don't have an MBA. I can't talk the corporate talk. You have 10 years of marketing experience and natural charisma. That's worth more than any degree. Catherine met his eyes. Skills you can actually do with your hands. Remember, Tom was right about that. Stop underselling yourself. Emmy looked up from her math homework. Miss Catherine is very bossy. I prefer strategically directive. Catherine smiled. But yes, I'm bossy. Is that a problem? Emmy considered this seriously. No, Dad needs bossy sometimes. He's too nice to people who don't deserve it. Daniel threw a dish towel at his daughter, who giggled and returned to her equations. Catherine watched the easy affection between them and felt something settle in her chest. This was family, not the sterile perfection she'd imagined as a child, but messy reality filled with homework and medical schedules and people who knew each other's patterns intimately. The Apex situation continued deteriorating. Marcus's evidence had triggered a full SEC investigation into both his activities and Catherine's management decisions. The stock had stabilized somewhat after Catherine's announcement of her planned transition, but three major clients had still terminated contracts. Board members who'd supported her compromise were receiving pressure from investors to force immediate change. Gerald called on day 12 of Catherine's domestic immersion. The board wants to accelerate your timeline. Step down as CEO by end of year instead of 6 months. Catherine was at Daniel's apartment helping Emmy build a diorama of the solar system for science class. She had Jupiter in one hand and carefully calibrated paint in the other. Tell them I'll consider it if they agree to full severance package and maintain my executive chair position for minimum 3 years. You're negotiating from weakness, Catherine. No, I'm negotiating from clarity. I know what I want now, Gerald. Apex was my whole life for 15 years. It's not anymore. If they want me out faster, they pay for the privilege. Gerald's laugh was rough with approval. I'll present it to the board. Catherine, you sound different. I am different. Turns out having a life outside the office changes your priorities. She set down Jupiter and reached for Saturn's rings. Who knew? The board accepted her terms. Catherine would step down as CEO on January 1st, exactly 5 weeks away, transitioning to executive chair with significantly reduced responsibilities and compensation. She'd keep her board seat, maintain strategic input, but surrender the day-to-day control that had consumed her existence. She felt nothing but relief. Daniel's business began shifting in response to Catherine's strategic input. She'd connected him with 3 corporate clients from her network companies that needed professional photography for annual reports, executive headshots, marketing materials. The contracts were substantial, steady work that didn't require weekend availability or exposure to the emotional intensity of weddings. You're changing my whole business model. Daniel reviewed the proposals one evening, his expression cycling between gratitude and something that looked like discomfort. These contracts alone would cover 6 months of Emmy's medication. You're changing it. I'm just opening doors. The work is still yours. Catherine watched his face carefully. Does it bother you that I have connections you can use? Honestly, yes. My pride says I should be doing this myself. Daniel set down the paperwork. But my daughter needs medication that costs $4,000 a month, and pride doesn't pay for experimental cardiac drugs. So I'm choosing Emmy over ego. Catherine moved closer, taking his hand. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Knowing when to accept help is a strength most people never develop. Emmy, who'd been pretending to read a book on the couch, piped up without looking up from her pages. Plus, Miss Catherine's help means you can come to more of my school stuff instead of working all the time. So really, we're all winning. The child had a point. 3 days before the custody hearing, Catherine met with the attorney. Daniel had finally agreed to accept her help hiring. Rebecca Walsh was a family law specialist with 20 years of experience and a reputation for winning impossible cases. She was also expensive enough that Daniel had physically flinched when Catherine mentioned her fees. I'm paying for this. Catherine's tone left no room for argument. Not as charity, as investment in my future family. Rebecca reviewed the case with the systematic thoroughness of someone who'd seen every variation of custody dispute. The Winters have a strong argument on paper. Financial instability, recent media scandal, your daughter's medical episode during the hospital visit. But they're making a critical error. Daniel leaned forward. What error? They're treating Emmy like she's property to be protected, not a person with her own preferences. At 11, her opinion carries significant weight with the judge. Rebecca turned to Catherine. You're the wild card here. A CEO dating a struggling photographer looks opportunistic. But if you can demonstrate genuine commitment, genuine understanding of Emmy's needs, you flip the narrative. How do I demonstrate that? Tell the truth. No corporate polish, no strategic presentation, just honest emotion about why you want to be in this child's life. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Judges see a lot of performance in family court. Authenticity stands out. The night before the hearing, Catherine stayed at Daniel's apartment. Not on the couch this time, but in his bed, both of them awake and tangled together in the darkness. Emmy was asleep down the hall, her breathing steady and even. Through the baby monitor, Daniel still kept, despite her protest that she was too old for monitoring. What if we lose? Daniel's voice was barely audible. What if tomorrow the judge decides the Winters are right and Emmy would be better off with them? Catherine tightened her arms around him. Then we appeal. We fight harder. We demonstrate that Emmy belongs with her father who loves her completely, not her grandparents who love the idea of protecting her from difficulty. You sound very certain. I'm certain because I've watched you with Emmy. I've seen how you know every detail of her medical care, how you've structured your entire life around her needs, how you've taught her that her heart condition doesn't define her worth. Catherine pulled back enough to see Daniel's face in the dim light. The Winters want to protect Emmy from struggle. You're teaching her how to be strong despite it. There's no comparison. Daniel kissed her slow and deep, then rested his forehead against hers. I love you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that. I love you too, both of you, and we're not losing Emmy. Cook County Family Court opened its doors at 8 a.m. on a gray December morning that threatened snow. Catherine arrived with Daniel and Emmy, all three of them dressed in their most respectable court attire. Emmy looked impossibly young in a navy dress, her dark hair pulled back, her hands gripping a folder that contained a letter she'd insisted on writing to the judge. The Winters were already present with their attorney, Patricia Ward, whose reputation preceded her. Patricia had built a career on protecting children from supposedly unfit parents, and her track record was formidable. She looked at Catherine with the kind of calculated assessment that reminded Catherine uncomfortably of her own boardroom tactics. The courtroom was smaller than Catherine expected, intimate in a way that made everything feel more personal. Judge Maria Torres presided, a woman in her mid-50s with the bearing of someone who'd heard every lie and manipulation family law could produce. She reviewed the initial filings with methodical attention, then looked up. This is a modification of custody hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Winters are seeking primary custody of Emmeline Hayes, age 11, currently in the care of her father, Daniel Hayes. Let's begin with Mrs. Winters' testimony. Constance took the stand with the confidence of someone certain of her moral authority. Patricia Ward guided her through a narrative Catherine had to admit was compelling: Lisa's death 3 years ago, Daniel's financial struggles, the mounting medical bills, Emmy's recent cardiac episodes, the hospital visit, the media scandal, the stress of a father juggling impossible demands. We love Emmy. She's our only grandchild. Constance's voice carried genuine emotion. After Lisa died, we tried to support Daniel, but he's overwhelmed. The medication Emmy needs, the specialist care, the stability she deserves, Daniel can't provide those things. Rebecca Walsh's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Winters, how often do you see Emmy? We live in Milwaukee. Every other weekend when possible. So, approximately twice a month. Rebecca consulted her notes. And in those visits, has Emmy expressed unhappiness with her father's care? Emmy loves her father, but children don't always know what's best for them. Has Emmy's medical team, her cardiologist, her primary care physician, expressed concerns about Daniel's management of her condition? Constance hesitated. Not in so many words, but the frequency of episodes. To Patel's written statement submitted to the court describes Daniel Hayes as one of the most engaged and informed parents I've worked with in 20 years of pediatric cardiology. Would you like me to read the full statement? Patricia Ward objected, citing relevance. Judge Torres overruled, requesting the statement be entered as evidence. Catherine watched the Winters' attorney adjust her strategy in real time. Philip Winters testified next, more measured than his wife, but equally convinced of their case. He outlined their financial stability, their health insurance that would fully cover Emmy's treatments, their ability to provide educational opportunities Daniel couldn't afford. We're not saying Daniel is a bad father. We're saying he's struggling. Emmy deserves better than struggle. Rebecca's cross-examination focused on practicalities. Mr. Winters, you're 67 years old. What happens to Emmy if something happens to you and your wife? We have estate planning. Emmy would be cared for. But you be raising a child with significant medical needs well into your 70s. You don't find that challenging. We're in excellent health. So is Daniel Hayes, and he's 38. The morning stretched into afternoon. Medical experts testified about Emmy's condition, her prognosis, the level of care required. Teachers described Emmy as bright, engaged, well-adjusted, despite missing school for appointments. The picture emerging was of a child who was managing her condition successfully under her father's care. Then Patricia Ward called her surprise witness, a child psychologist who'd reviewed the case files and interviewed Emmy twice without Daniel's knowledge. The testimony was devastating. Dr. Kenneth Morrison described Emmy as anxious, fearful of abandonment, stressed by her father's financial instability and the recent media attention. This child is carrying adult-level anxiety about money, about her father's relationship, about her own mortality. She's 11. She should be worried about schoolwork and friends, not whether her medical condition is bankrupting her family. Rebecca's objection was immediate, but the damage was done. Judge Torres called a 30-minute recess, and Catherine watched Daniel's composure crack. They interviewed Emmy without telling me they had a psychologist evaluate her based on files they cherry-picked. His hands were shaking. How is that legal? Rebecca's expression was grim. It's legal if they have legitimate concern for the child's welfare. It's also incredibly effective. Catherine, we need to recalibrate our strategy. Catherine excused herself and found Emmy in the courthouse bathroom with a victim advocate, the girl's face pale and tear-streaked. They're saying I'm too anxious to be with Dad. They're saying I'm not okay. Catherine knelt in front of Emmy, taking both the girl's hands. You are okay. You're dealing with something incredibly difficult, and you're doing it with remarkable courage. Don't let their tactics convince you otherwise. But what if the judge believes them? What if she thinks I'd be better with Grammy and Grampy? Then we'll appeal. We'll fight. We'll demonstrate the truth. Catherine squeezed Emmy's hands gently. But Emmy, you have a voice here too. The judge is going to talk to you. You can tell her what you want. Emmy nodded, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that reminded Catherine painfully of herself at that age. I know what I want. I want to stay with Dad and with you. The afternoon session resumed with Daniel's testimony. He walked through his business, his financial situation, his management of Emmy's medical care. Rebecca guided him through the narrative they'd prepared, a devoted father who'd restructured his entire life around his daughter's needs, who'd built a successful business despite challenges, who'd created a stable home even in the face of tragedy. Patricia Ward's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Hayes, you owe approximately $47,000 in medical debt. Correct. Correct. I'm making monthly payments. And this new relationship with Ms. Sterling, when did that begin relative to your financial crisis? Our relationship developed independently of my financial situation. But you won't deny that Ms. Sterling has the resources to solve your financial problems. That must be convenient. Rebecca objected. Judge Torres sustained it, but the implication hung in the air. Daniel was using Catherine for money. Then it was Catherine's turn. She took the stand, feeling every eye in the courtroom assessing her. And for the first time in 20 years, Catherine Sterling didn't have a rehearsed presentation ready. Rebecca had been clear: authenticity over strategy, truth over performance. Rebecca began gently. Miss Sterling, how did you meet Daniel Hayes? I hired him to photograph Apex Technologies' annual report 6 months ago. He was professional, talented, and the first person in 15 years who told me I didn't smile genuinely in photographs. When did your relationship become personal? Gradually. We started having coffee to discuss his business strategy, then dinner to talk about things that had nothing to do with business. Then I realized I was in love with him and his daughter, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. Patricia Ward's cross-examination began immediately after. Ms. Sterling, you run a multi-billion-dollar company. Why are you interested in a struggling photographer? Catherine met the attorney's eyes without flinching. Because he's a good man. Because he's a devoted father. Because he's built something real with his daughter that's worth infinitely more than any corporate empire. That's very romantic. But let's discuss practicalities. You have no experience with children, no experience with chronic medical conditions, no experience with the daily demands of parenting. What makes you believe you're qualified to be part of Emmy's life? I'm not qualified. I'm learning. I've spent the last 3 weeks learning Emmy's medication schedule, her doctor's names, her school requirements, her anxiety triggers. Catherine's voice stayed steady. I don't have experience, Ms. Ward, but I have commitment. And I have love for a child who deserves to grow up with her father, not her well-meaning but misguided grandparents. Emmy has had multiple cardiac episodes since you entered her life. The stress of this relationship, the media attention, the upheaval, you don't think that's affecting her health? Catherine felt the trap closing. This was the question she'd been dreading, the argument she had no perfect answer for. She could deflect, minimize, retreat into corporate speak, or she could do what Rebecca advised and tell the truth. Yes, the media attention has caused Emmy stress. My presence in her life has created upheaval. Change is stressful, especially for a child dealing with a chronic condition. Catherine paused, gathering the rest of her truth. But love is also stressful. Building a family is stressful. Life is stressful. The question isn't whether Emmy experiences stress. The question is whether she's learning to manage it with people who love her completely, who see her as strong rather than fragile, who are teaching her that her heart condition doesn't define her worth. Patricia's expression hardened. That's a lovely philosophy, Ms. Sterling. But philosophy doesn't pay for experimental cardiac medications. Actually, it does. Catherine had been waiting for this opening. I've established a foundation specifically to support families dealing with pediatric cardiac conditions. It's funded independently of my relationship with Daniel, managed by trustees who have no connection to either of us, and it provides financial assistance for medications, treatments, and support services. Emmy qualifies for that assistance whether or not I remain in her life. The courtroom went very quiet. Even Patricia Ward looked momentarily thrown. You established a charitable foundation to help your boyfriend's daughter. I established a charitable foundation to help children like Emmy. She happens to be the first recipient, but the foundation will continue helping families long after I'm gone. Catherine held Patricia's gaze. Emmy's medical needs are real. Daniel's financial struggles are real. But the solution isn't removing Emmy from the father who loves her. It's providing resources so families don't have to choose between medical care and financial stability. Judge Torres leaned forward slightly, the first sign of real interest she had shown. Ms. Sterling, this foundation, when was it established? 2 weeks ago. It's fully funded with $10 million of my personal assets structured to provide ongoing support. Catherine pulled documentation from her folder. The first grants are being distributed next month. Emmy's family is one of 20 recipients in the initial cohort. The judge accepted the documentation, reviewing it with careful attention. Catherine watched Constance and Philip Winter's faces cycle through confusion, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. Judge Torres spoke after several minutes of silence. I'd like to speak with Emmeline privately in chambers. Counselors, you'll wait here. Emmy disappeared into the judge's chambers, leaving the adults in tense silence. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Catherine watched Daniel's jaw work, his hands clenched in his lap. Constance Winters looked smaller somehow, Philip's arm around her shoulders. When Emmy emerged, her face was composed, but her eyes were red. She walked directly to Daniel, climbed into his lap, despite being arguably too old for that, and buried her face in his shoulder. Whatever she'd told the judge, it had cost her something. Judge Torres returned to the bench, her expression professionally neutral. I've reviewed all testimony, examined the evidence, and spoken extensively with Emmeline. This is a difficult case because both parties clearly love this child and want what's best for her. Catherine felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything balanced on the next words. However, Emmy is not in danger. She's thriving medically, academically, and emotionally under her father's care. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, your concerns about financial stability are noted, but they don't override Emmy's clear preference to remain with her father. Judge Torres's gaze swept the courtroom. Furthermore, Ms. Sterling's foundation addresses the financial concerns that form the core of your petition. Constance made a small sound that might have been protest or relief. My ruling is as follows. Daniel Hayes retains primary custody of Emmeline Hayes. Visitation with Mr. and Mrs. Winters will expand from bi-monthly to monthly weekends, with additional holiday visitation to be negotiated between parties. Judge Torres looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Hayes, I'm ordering continued counseling for Emmeline to help her process the anxiety Dr. Morrison identified. I'm also requiring 6-month check-ins with the court to ensure Emmy's needs are being met. Daniel's arms tightened around Emmy. Catherine felt tears sliding down her face, all the Ice Queen's armor finally irrevocably shattered. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in motion. Rebecca Walsh was smiling. The Winters were conferring with Patricia Ward. Daniel was holding Emmy like he'd never let go, both of them crying quietly. Catherine stood frozen, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. They'd won. Emmy was staying with Daniel. The family they'd been building survived. Constance approached as they were gathering their things, her expression complicated. Miss Sterling, a word? Catherine braced herself for attack, but Constance's voice when she spoke was quiet, almost defeated. I was wrong about you. Not entirely wrong, you've caused significant upheaval in Emmy's life, but wrong about your intentions. She glanced at Emmy, who was still wrapped around Daniel. My granddaughter clearly loves you. And that foundation, that's more than I expected. I love her too. Both of them. I see that now. Constance straightened her shoulders, pride reasserting itself. We'll still be part of Emmy's life. Monthly visits, holidays. But Mr. Hayes, Miss Sterling, if anything happens to suggest Emmy isn't thriving, we will petition again. Philip Winters nodded agreement, his expression stern, but less hostile. Emmy's welfare comes first, always. Daniel found his voice. On that, we completely agree. The Winters left without further conversation. Catherine watched them go, feeling something like sympathy. They loved Emmy. They just didn't know how to express it without trying to control everything. Outside the courthouse, snow had started falling, dusting Chicago in premature December white. Emmy spun in circles, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue, while Daniel and Catherine stood close together, processing the enormity of what had just transpired. You established a $10 million foundation without telling me. Daniel's tone was somewhere between awe and exasperation. Catherine, that's the best use of my money I've ever found. Those families need help. Emmy needs help. And I have more money than any human being reasonably needs. Catherine took his hand. The foundation was always going to happen. Meeting you and Emmy just accelerated the timeline. Emmy finished her snowflake catching and came to stand between them. Can we get pizza? I'm starving, and today was really stressful, and Dad always says pizza fixes everything. They went for pizza. Not at some trendy restaurant, but at the neighborhood place near Daniel's apartment, where the owner knew Emmy's name and nobody cared that Catherine Sterling, soon-to-be former CEO of Apex Technologies, was eating deep dish in jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Halfway through dinner, Catherine's phone rang. Paige calling with news that couldn't wait. The SEC investigation concluded. Marcus had been selling proprietary information to Nexitech for 18 months. They have emails, wire transfers, everything. He's being charged with corporate espionage and securities fraud. Catherine set down her pizza slice carefully. When is this going public? Already is. The SEC filed charges an hour ago. Marcus just issued a statement claiming he was trying to protect Apex from your supposedly reckless leadership. Paige's voice carried grim satisfaction. But the evidence is overwhelming. He's done, Catherine. Completely done. What about Apex, the stock? Already recovering. Up 12 points since the news broke. The board wants to schedule an emergency meeting for tomorrow. They're suggesting you might want to reconsider the accelerated departure timeline. Catherine looked at Daniel across the table, at Emmy with tomato sauce on her chin, at the life they'd built in 3 chaotic weeks. She thought about her penthouse that felt like a museum, about the 15 years she'd spent building an empire at the cost of everything else, about the choice she'd already made. Tell the board I'm honored by their confidence, but my decision stands. I step down as CEO January 1st. Sloan Blackwell is ready to take over. She has my complete support, and I'm looking forward to having a life outside Apex's boardroom. Paige was quiet for a long moment. You're really doing this? Walking away? I'm not walking away. I'm walking towards something better. Catherine smiled at Daniel, who was clearly trying not to eavesdrop while simultaneously dying of curiosity. Paige, I'll see you tomorrow for transition planning. But my priorities have changed. Permanently. She ended the call and explained the Marcus situation to Daniel, while Emmy listened with wide eyes. The man who tried to destroy Catherine's career was facing federal charges. Justice delivered with the precision of a well-executed legal strategy. How do you feel about it? Daniel asked. Vindicated, angry, satisfied. Catherine considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, Marcus's downfall would have felt like victory. Now it just felt like the final chapter of a story that no longer defined her. I feel grateful. Grateful that his attempt to destroy me failed. Grateful that the collateral damage didn't destroy us. Grateful that I figured out what actually matters before it was too late. Emmy reached across the table and took Catherine's hand. Does this mean you can come to my astronomy club presentation next week? Dad has a wedding shoot, and Grammy Constance is still mad about the court thing, and I really want someone there. Catherine felt something in her chest expand warm and painful, and absolutely perfect. I'll be there, front row. 3 days later, Catherine attended her final board meeting as CEO of Apex Technologies. The emergency session Paige had mentioned became a formal transition meeting with Sloan Blackwell officially accepting the CEO role effective January 1st. The board that had voted to accelerate Catherine's departure now tried to convince her to stay longer to maintain more control, to not abandon the empire she'd built. Gerald Hoffman was the only one who seemed to understand. After the meeting, he pulled Catherine aside. You're making the right choice. I've watched brilliant people sacrifice everything for success, and none of them ended up happy. You found something real. Don't lose it chasing something you've already proved you can do. I'm not losing Apex entirely. Executive chair for 3 years, strategic input board seat. I'm just not making it my entire existence anymore. That's called wisdom, Catherine. Most people never learn it. Gerald smiled, the expression softening his usually harsh features. Invite me to the wedding, would you? I'd like to see what you're walking toward. The wedding. Catherine and Daniel hadn't officially discussed it, but the inevitability hummed between them like a promise neither needed to speak aloud yet. Christmas arrived with Chicago buried in snow and Catherine experiencing her first holiday season that didn't involve working through December 25th. Instead, she spent Christmas Eve at Daniel's apartment helping Emmy build an elaborate gingerbread replica of the solar system, complete with candy-coated planets and frosting asteroid belts. This is scientifically inaccurate. Emmy positioned Mars with the precision of a tiny engineer, but it tastes better than accuracy. Daniel appeared from the kitchen with hot chocolate that actually involved melting real chocolate instead of powder from a packet. Catherine had learned he took Christmas traditions seriously, each one a careful construction of normalcy for Emmy after Lisa's death. Your mom started the gingerbread tradition, didn't she? Catherine asked Emmy gently. They'd reached the point where mentioning Lisa didn't feel like trespassing, but Catherine still moved carefully. Emmy nodded, her expression thoughtful. Mom made gingerbread houses, but I like space better than houses, so we adapted. She looked up at Catherine with that unnerving clarity. Do you think Mom would like you? Daniel started to intervene, but Catherine held up a hand. Emmy deserved an honest answer. I think your mom would want your dad to be happy. I think she'd want you to have people in your life who love you completely. Whether she'd like me specifically, I don't know. But I hope she'd approve of how hard I'm trying to be worthy of you both. Emmy studied Catherine's face for a long moment, then nodded decisively. I think she'd like you. You make Dad smile the way he used to in old photos, before Mom died and everything got hard. That night, after Emmy was asleep, Catherine and Daniel sat on his couch with the lights off, except for the small Christmas tree in the corner. Daniel had turned down Catherine's offer to buy an expensive tree, insisting on their tradition of getting the Charlie Brown special from the lot down the street. The scraggly pine was decorated with ornaments Emmy had made over the years, each one telling a story Catherine was learning to read. I have something for you. Daniel pulled a small box from his pocket, his hand slightly shaky. It's not expensive. It's not from some fancy jewelry store, but it's important. Catherine opened the box to find a simple silver ring, delicate and understated. Daniel, it's not an engagement ring, not yet. I'm not proposing on Christmas Eve when you're covered in gingerbread frosting and we just survived a custody battle 3 days ago. Daniel took the ring from the box, holding it up to the Christmas lights. It's a promise ring, a promise that I'm all in, that I want to build a life with you, that when I do propose, it'll be because we're both ready, not because we're caught up in crisis mode. Catherine held out her hand, letting Daniel slide the ring onto her right hand. I love you. I love Emmy. I love this life we're building, even though it's chaotic and complicated and nothing like what I planned. What did you plan? Honestly, I didn't plan anything beyond Apex. I thought professional success was enough. I was wrong. Catherine leaned into Daniel's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the Christmas lights blink patterns across the ceiling. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of snow. Inside, Catherine Sterling, Former Ice Queen, soon-to-be former CEO, current woman in love, felt more at home than she'd ever felt in her pristine penthouse. The proposal came 6 weeks later on a February afternoon at Navy Pier. Daniel had planned it carefully, recruiting Emmy as co-conspirator. They walked along the pier under gray winter skies, Emmy dragging them toward the spot where she'd drawn her original picture of the three of them together. Here, Emmy stopped at the railing overlooking Lake Michigan. This is where we're supposed to be. Daniel pulled out the drawings Emmy had made over the past months, the many versions of their family constellation. You drew us here before we even knew we were going to be a we. You saw it before we did. Emmy nodded seriously. I'm very observant. Also, you were both being obvious and dumb about it. Catherine laughed, but the sound caught in her throat when Daniel dropped to one knee right there on Navy Pier with tourists walking past and Emmy standing witness. Catherine Sterling, you walked into my studio 6 months ago and completely disrupted my carefully controlled life. You made me remember that playing it safe means missing out on everything that matters. You taught my daughter that being strong doesn't mean being perfect. Daniel pulled a ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a diamond that caught the winter light. Will you marry me? Will you officially join our weird little family and let us join yours? Will you take the risk of building something that matters more than any empire? Catherine's vision blurred with tears, but she managed to nod. Yes, to all of it. Yes. The ring fit perfectly. Emmy cheered loud enough to startle nearby pigeons. A street musician started playing something romantic and slightly off-key. And Catherine Sterling, who'd built a billion-dollar company on ice-cold calculation, kissed her fiancé on Navy Pier, while his daughter took photos with Daniel's professional camera, because someone needs to document this properly. The wedding happened 4 months later in June, when Chicago finally remembered it was supposed to be warm. Small ceremony at the Botanic Garden. 50 guests who actually mattered, instead of 300 business contacts Catherine had never liked. Emmy served as maid of honor in a purple dress she'd picked herself, carrying rings and looking impossibly grown up at almost 12. Catherine's mother walked her down the aisle, her face wet with happy tears. I was starting to think you'd married your company, Kathy. I'm glad I was wrong. Daniel waited at the altar in a suit he'd actually bought, instead of borrowed his face doing complicated emotional things when he saw Catherine. She'd chosen a simple ivory dress instead of elaborate bridal construction, wanting to look like herself instead of some wedding magazine fantasy. The vows they'd written were short and brutally honest. Daniel promised to teach Catherine that success could mean something beyond quarterly earnings. Catherine promised to remember that empires were worthless without people to share them with. Emmy, not included in the formal vows, but inserting herself anyway, promised to tell them both when they were being obvious and dumb about feelings. The reception was held at a small restaurant, nothing like the elaborate affairs Catherine had attended as networking obligations for 15 years. Real food instead of artistic tiny portions. A DJ who played actual dance music instead of tasteful background noise. Speeches from Big Tom about Daniel's journey from corporate marketing to photography, from Paige about Catherine's transformation from Ice Queen to actual human being. Gerald Hoffman's toast was the one that made Catherine cry. I invested in Catherine Sterling 20 years ago because she had vision and drive. I'm here today because she figured out that vision means nothing if you can't see what actually matters. To the bride and groom, and to the rare wisdom of knowing when to stop building empires and start building homes. Catherine danced with Daniel with Emmy with her mother. She laughed at Big Tom's terrible jokes and Paige's surprisingly accurate impressions of Catherine's old boardroom persona. She ate cake that was probably too sweet and drank champagne that was definitely too expensive for the occasion. And somewhere around midnight, standing in the garden with fairy lights strung between trees and her new family surrounding her, Catherine Sterling Hayes realized she'd finally figured out what success actually meant. 3 years later, Catherine stood in the kitchen of their house in Lincoln Park, bigger than Daniel's old apartment, smaller than her penthouse, exactly right for a family of 4, and reviewed the morning schedule with the organized precision that still defined her approach to life. Emmy, now 14 and taller than Catherine, was arguing with her younger brother Lucas about who got the last blueberry muffin. Lucas, aged 2 and stubbornly independent, had opinions about everything and the lung capacity to express them loudly. Emmy, you had 2 muffins already. Lucas can have this one. Catherine intervened with practiced efficiency, then turned to Daniel. Your gallery showing starts at 7. I'll handle Lucas's bedtime if you need to stay late for the opening reception. Daniel kissed her, leaving flour on her cheek from whatever he'd been baking. His photography business had exploded over the past 3 years, culminating in a major exhibition at the Art Institute, showcasing his Modern Family series intimate portraits of diverse family structures that had earned critical acclaim and commercial success. Mom, can you drive me to astronomy club after school? Dad has that corporate shoot at Apex. Emmy had started calling Catherine Mom about a year ago, casually, like it had always been the natural progression. Catherine checked her calendar, finding the afternoon miraculously clear. I can drive you. Actually, I'd love to see your presentation on exoplanet detection. Emmy rolled her eyes with the particular exasperation only teenagers could achieve. You're going to ask technical questions that embarrass me in front of my friends. Probably. It's one of my few remaining parental privileges now that you're smarter than me. Lucas banged his spoon against his high chair, demanding attention. Catherine scooped him up, feeling the familiar weight of her son against her hip. He had Daniel's eyes and her stubborn chin, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. The doorbell rang. Catherine's mother, who'd moved to Chicago to be closer to her grandchildren, arriving for her weekly babysitting session. Rosa Sterling swept in with the energy of a woman 20 years younger, immediately claiming Lucas and demanding updates on everyone's week. This was life now. Organized chaos, school schedules and gallery openings, and toddler tantrums. Board meetings for Apex. Catherine still served as executive chair, providing strategic guidance without the consuming intensity of CEO responsibilities. Consulting work for other companies, navigating succession planning. The foundation she'd established had grown to serve 300 families annually, with Emmy serving on the youth advisory board. Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Sloan Blackwell, Apex's current CEO and Catherine's handpicked successor. TechCrunch just named Apex one of the best managed tech companies in the country. Your transition strategy is literally being taught as a case study at Kellogg. Thought you'd want to know. Catherine smiled and pocketed her phone. 3 years ago, that recognition would have been everything. Now it was just pleasant confirmation that she'd made the right choice stepping back. What are you thinking about? Daniel appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, while she watched Emmy help Lucas with his muffin. That I was terrified of losing Apex. Turned out I gained everything that actually mattered. Catherine leaned back into her husband's embrace. Also that Emmy's college fund needs reviewing. She's talking about MIT's astrophysics program, and we need to make sure that money isn't a barrier. I know. We'll figure it out. Daniel turned her to face him. You know what I love about you? You still approach everything like it's a strategic problem to solve, but now you're solving for happiness instead of market share. Lucas chose that moment to fling his muffin across the kitchen, scoring a direct hit on Catherine's work laptop. Emmy dissolved into giggles. Rosa started cleaning up the mess while dispensing wisdom about raising toddlers that Catherine pretended to listen to while actually watching her family with quiet contentment. Her phone buzzed again, this time a news alert about Marcus Thornton's sentencing hearing. 18 months in federal prison, millions in fines, permanent ban from corporate leadership. The man who'd tried to destroy Catherine had instead destroyed himself. Catherine dismissed the notification without reading the full article. Marcus Thornton belonged to a version of her life that felt like ancient history. She'd learned the hard way that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was building something so fundamentally good that their attacks became irrelevant. That evening, Catherine sat in the Art Institute watching Daniel's opening reception, Emmy beside her, pointing out compositional techniques she'd learned from her father. The Modern Families series featured dozens of families, blended, adoptive, single-parent, same-sex, traditional, unconventional. Each photograph captured authentic love in its many forms. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large print titled Constellation. It showed Catherine, Daniel, Emmy, and Lucas on Navy Pier at sunset, arranged exactly like Emmy's original drawing. But this version was real, not imagined possibility, but lived reality. 4 people who'd found each other and built something that mattered more than any empire. A reporter from Chicago Magazine approached for an interview. Ms. Sterling Hayes, you famously stepped down as CEO of Apex Technologies 3 years ago. Any regrets? Catherine looked at her family. Daniel charming potential buyers. Emmy explaining orbital mechanics to a confused gallery patron, Lucas asleep in Rose's arms, and felt absolute certainty. None, I built companies, but this, she gestured toward her family. This is the only thing I've built that I'm genuinely proud of. Everything else was just practice for getting this right. The reporter scribbled notes, clearly hoping for something more dramatic. But Catherine had nothing more to offer. She'd spent 15 years chasing success, and it had taken losing almost everything to understand what success actually meant. Late that night back home, with Lucas asleep and Emmy doing homework, Catherine found Daniel on their back porch reviewing photos from the gallery opening. That reporter asked if I regretted leaving Apex. Catherine settled beside him. I told her no, but I didn't tell her the full truth. Daniel looked up concerned. What's the full truth? That leaving Apex was the first genuinely successful decision I ever made. Everything before that was just accumulation. Catherine gestured at their house, at the life they'd built. This is actual achievement. Building a family, teaching Emmy she's not defined by her heart condition. Raising Lucas to understand that success means more than money. Staying married to you despite your terrible habit of leaving photography equipment everywhere. Daniel pulled her close, kissing her temple. For the record, you leave legal briefs everywhere, your morning routine requires 45 minutes and military precision, and you still can't make pizza without creating a flour disaster that looks like a small explosion. I contain multitudes. Catherine smiled against his shoulder. Multitudes that finally figured out what matters. They sat together in the darkness, watching Chicago lights blink patterns across the night skyline. Somewhere in the house, Emmy was probably staying up too late reading astrophysics papers. Lucas was definitely sleeping in a position that would require physical therapy when he was 30. Rosa had left sticky notes with advice all over the refrigerator. The dishwasher needed running. The calendar for next week looked impossible. It was gloriously, perfectly imperfect. Catherine Sterling had spent 15 years building an empire. She'd been on magazine covers, won industry awards, built something that changed the technology landscape. None of it had made her happy. But this messy, complicated, beautiful life with Daniel and Emmy and Lucas, this made her happy. This filled the hollow space she'd been carrying since she was 27 and decided professional success would be enough. She'd been wrong about success. She'd been wrong about enough. She'd been wrong about what mattered. Getting it right had cost her a CEO position, a reputation as the Ice Queen, and the pristine perfection of a life built around avoiding vulnerability. Best trade she'd ever made.